This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show as together we hear how they are making their world better. Hello, podcast listeners. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Always a good reminder to mention that we have a YouTube channel now. I've mentioned that a couple of times now. Go over to YouTube and just type in Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. And more than that, we encourage you to subscribe. That'll just help us get this content out to more great leaders just like you. So today, a really critical topic: conflict in the workplace. Now, there's no doubt that our workplace has been through unprecedented changes in recent years, particularly post-COVID, from a dramatic increase in remote work, of course, to mounting fears that artificial intelligence may eliminate jobs. Employees are stressed, they're disengaged sometimes, they're quiet quitting, and yearning for human connection. Now, rather than fostering positive, healthy relationships as a way to ease the stress, workplace conflict has actually been rapidly growing as a problem everywhere around the country. In fact, research shows that 70% have experienced the same or worsening workplace conflict over the last few years. So what are you to do? How are you to manage workplace conflict? Well, my guest today is David Dye. David is a nonprofit consultant. He's also a co-author, along with Karin Hurt, of the new book, Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict. Today, you'll learn some practical tips as to how to manage workplace conflict better. Thanks for tuning in. Now on to the show. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business. Well, truly, David, thank you so much for being on the show today. Glad you could be here. You've got a new book out. And I think as we were talking before, just before we started recording this show, today's topic is not easy, but it's a critical topic that leaders really need to address. And the workplace really has seen some unprecedented changes in recent years, and employees are stressed. They're disengaged at times. Some are quiet quitting. We're going to talk about that. And they're yearning for human connection because of this Zoom world that we live in. Now, this issue really does form your survey to evaluate workplace conflict and collaboration. So maybe you could start out today with our podcast interview by telling us a bit about your World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Survey. What have been your findings and how does it tie into your new book entitled Powerful Phrases?
Absolutely. Well, again, Rob, thanks for having me on the show here. So Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict is the name of the book. And I have a 17-year background working within the nonprofit industry, and then more time after that serving on boards, consulting, and training within the industry as well. So have a great passion and a heart for everyone listening. So thank you for the work you do. It is desperately needed. And I think that workplace conflict is one of those topics that a lot of times in the nonprofit world, we struggle with because we're about the mission and the service and so forth, and that gets subjugated to all of that. So we'll get into that. But the reason that we did this survey was our publishers, actually, HarperCollins Leadership, came to us and said, hey, we see a need for this book on workplace conflict, and we want it to be super practical, and that's what you guys do. So would you, and with your work with clients and everything, would you be willing to write the book? And so we thought about it, and we said, yeah, but for us, we want everything we do to be very grounded in research. And the workplace has changed in the last couple of years, hasn't it? Post-pandemic and so forth. So we wanted to find out what's going on now. So we did the survey that you mentioned, the Global World Workplace Conflict and Collaboration Study, surveyed over 5,000 people, 46 different countries to find out what's happening. And some just top-level questions. We asked, hey, are you experiencing more or less conflict in the last couple of years? And the answer was more. The same or more, 70% of folks around the world. And fascinating, very little regional difference. I think the US came in at 71% more, and where the world average was 70% more. So I think the highest was like Germany or India were like at 76%, So at any rate, pretty consistent around the world saying the same or more. And then if you look at the folks who are experiencing less, who say there's that 30% who said, yeah, I'm having less conflict. I said, well, why is that? And you dive into the numbers, and half of those people are experiencing less because they escaped. They left a conflict prone workplace. They said, hey, I'm working from home and I minimize my contact with other human beings. Well, okay, they're experiencing less conflict because of that. But now what's lost in all of that? You're losing the innovation, creativity, problem solving, and so forth. So that was the top level question. Then we went into effects. Why is the conflict greater? And then one of the fascinating parts for us was the qualitative side. We said, tell us about a conflict, a major conflict you've had in your career. And people listed those out. And then we asked, okay, if you could go back and give yourself advice, what advice would you have for your former self in that scenario? And this is where it's so fascinating. 55% of people said, I would tell myself to be patient, to stay calm. Yeah. And then 21%, which was the second most common, said, I would tell myself, talk about it sooner, have the conversation sooner. And so, 76% of 5,000 plus people around the world said, I would say, be patient, stay calm, talk about it sooner. Then the question is, how? And that's where the book really answers the question is, how do you do those things?
Really, I love this again, just so practical. And one stat that you shared, you share in your book, I should say, is that 70% of your survey respondents say that workplace conflict has stayed the same or increased in recent times. Why do you think that's happening? What's causing this, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, we actually asked. So I don't even have to go with just my opinion. I'll tell you what the data said is the top two reasons people cited were overwhelm, burnout, understaffing, which, you've got inflation, you've got the great resignation of people who global staring contest with mortality. You know what? I'm out. I don't need to do this anymore. And then some other economic issues that affect all that. So there's just not as many people for the number of jobs, and that'll stabilize and bounce back and forth. But that's been a major stressor and continues to be. And then you've got a general category of poor management practices, which before we're hard on our managers, and here our company is Let's Grow Leaders. So our bread and butter every day is helping leaders and managers to be human-centered with very practical tools and techniques to do that. And if you look at the data around management right now, managers for the first time in history have a higher level of disengagement than the people they're leading. And it's the first time that number the first time that's ever been that way. Well, why? Lots of factors going into that. One is you have a very rapidly changing workplace. As you said in your introduction, we've got remote, hybrid. Are we coming back? Are we not? Are we getting together for what purpose? How's all that work? You've got the shifting workplace that happened for many people across time zones, across geographies, is now, as with technology, people can be working from anywhere. Well, that anywhere comes at a cost too. So you've got those complexities, bigger organizations, whatnot. And then you've got the increasing demands of the workforce, which I would say are positive, but are also challenging for leaders who don't know how to do that, which are for greater human connection. You mentioned these earlier, that people are yearning for more connection, for more support, for more vulnerability and transparency from their leaders, for more obvious connection of the work they do to the mission and values behind it, which in the nonprofit sector can be more easily accomplished, but also comes at a cost if we're not careful. And so you see all of those factors coming together, and managers are really struggling to catch up, and more is put on their plate. And how do you do it all? So that's some of those two factors when you look at overwhelm, burnout, understaffing, and poor management practices. Then followed up with that, you've got lingering mental health, anxiety, some of those kinds of challenges, tolerance issues, less tolerance, understanding for others in a social media driven, polarized world that is a reality that we're facing these days, and that can't help but bleed over sometimes. And then you've got less motivated workforce that many people cite in different ways. So these are a lot of the factors that are contributing.
Well, for many of us, maybe most of us, when it comes to our work life, we can spend as much or more time with our coworkers than our families, right? That's just the reality of a job typically. Now, in any relationship, conflict is inevitable, right? Whether it be a marriage relationship, any kind of relationship, you're going to have that. So a work relationship, you can't expect not to have conflict. So you already started this process, but when it comes to workplace conflict, let's talk about the first steps to diffusing a difficult situation based on your research.
Yeah, and I want to highlight what you just said there, Rob, which is so important. Conflict is inevitable, and it's not necessarily bad. And if we're doing good work and we really care, we should have conflict, because we're going to see different paths to get there. So, if you're listener, you're serving your constituents, and Your colleague is like, I think we could better serve them this way. And you're like, well, I think we could serve them this way. That's a great conflict to have because you both care, you've got insights. And if you do it well, you're going to get a better outcome in the end. So the question is, and when most of us think of conflict, we automatically go, ooh, negative, stay away, is because we're thinking about destructive conflict, right? And that's the kind that makes us worse, that tears people down, that damages relationships. And as we all think of that, we want less of that and we want more of what I call productive conflict, or if we want to use a different word, collaboration, right? It's our working together for those common outcomes. So just with that hat of we want less of this, more of this, so how do we get there? And it really begins with there are 4 dimensions of teamwork, collaboration. They're present with every conflict we have. And the degree to which they're present makes it an easier conversation to have or harder if they're missing. And so these 4 dimensions, and we can dive into them, but the first one is connection. Do we know one another as human beings? The more we're connected, the easier things are, the more understanding we have. Second is clarity. And this is one of the, when solved, has huge benefits, but it's also one of the most frequently missing. Do we have a shared understanding of success? And lots of different aspects of that. Third is curiosity. Are we genuinely open to one another's perspectives and different ways of doing things? And then the fourth and final one is commitment. And even people who are really good sometimes at having the conversations leave off this fourth one, which is, do we create a shared agreement of how we're moving forward based on the conversation we just had? And what is the way in which we're going to follow up, hold ourselves accountable, and so forth? And so those 4 dimensions of collaboration or productive conflict are things that we can invest in before we're in any kind of disagreement. They're also specific, and that's where so many of the phrases come in this book. 300 plus phrases in total in this book to deal with all kinds of different scenarios, but every single one of them lands in one or more of those 4 dimensions. So again, connection, clarity, curiosity, and commitment.
I like how you laid those 4 dimensions out. And like I said, we'll probably get back into those. Now, one of the insights that really caught my attention was how you leaned heavily into what you call 12 GOAT powerful phrases, which obviously you get the title of your book. Talk about that. Can you explain what these are and how can we implement these effectively in our work environment?
Well, yes, absolutely. So, and yeah, you're right. We lead it heavily. So when we say goat, we even have goats in the in the book, like actual sketched out cartoon goats, superheroes. But when we say goat, what we're talking about there is greatest of all time. Yeah. So our son, like, and we're like our son, this is our son showing up in the book because, he's at that stage in life where he's like, that's goated, man. That's the goat. Everything's goat, this, goat, that. Like everything can't be the goat, but these phrases are, and here's how they break down. So we've got, for those 4 dimensions, we have 3 phrases that we feel are some of the greatest of all time. And why is that? Because these phrases you can use in so many different circumstances. And so, people ask like, well, gosh, there's 300 plus different phrases in the book. There's dozens and dozens of scenarios for me to go through. Like, where do I start? Well, a good place to start is with these 12 questions or these 12 phrases, because if you can master just 3 or 4 of these, you're going to see immediate benefit in your conversations. So just give you a couple of examples and we can dive in more if we want to. But so in connection, a really powerful phrase for connection, you're in a conversation with somebody, is simply, tell me more. Hey, just tell me more. Because right there, you're listening to understand. You're conveying to that person you really care about what they have to say. You're not immediately getting defensive, sharing your perspective, trying to tell them they're wrong. You're just trying to understand more. And that is a connecting phrase. Tell me more. Another one that is important is as you're going into a conversation is stating your intent for the conversation. You can do this with connection. Hey, listen, you're getting ready to talk to your boss. You're getting ready to talk to a coworker, a colleague, or a team member. Hey, listen, I really care about you, this team, this project, whatever the topic is. And I'm confident we can find a solution we can all work with. So I want to have this conversation to find that solution. There are so many of these that I could get down the road and get pretty excited about.
Well, it's a great primer to help people, encourage them to get the book, because there's more information they can find in the book. So we'll leave it there to say, hey, if that whetted your appetite, find out more, get this book. Now, I mentioned to you when we were just chatting right before we started recording, my listeners have really found that this podcast has really helped them when it gets very practical. And this is a very practical topic. So let's get to a few practical examples. I know you kind of have started around the edges to talk about this, particularly with like the 4 dimensions. Now, let's talk about this. It really is a fine line between, on the one hand, being a people pleaser, right? On the other, though, you don't want to create additional conflict just because if you enjoy conflict, you don't want to do that either. When it comes to saying no, when someone who is a report to you or someone who's a colleague on your team, and you clearly have to say no to whatever the request is, how can people say no in a way that doesn't create conflict, especially when the other person is someone's direct report? Maybe you could talk about that practical example.
Totally. And Rob, this is actually one of my very favorite of all of the powerful phrase chapters because, and I'm going to take it even to another level of how do you say no to your boss? How do you say no to your manager, right? This is one of the toughest that we can think about, but the techniques are similar in every respect. So let's begin. Before we get into the phrases, we need to get into mindset, which is every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. The question is, are you saying no consciously or passively, intentionally or accidentally? And so taking ownership for your no's makes you a more effective human being. It's going to make you more effective for your clients, your service, your cause, your constituents, your parishioners, whoever it is that you're serving, right? You're going to be more effective when you take ownership of those no's. So that's the mindset we have to start with is you're always saying no to something. We want to be conscious about that. So how are we going to say no in these moments is by saying yes. And we're going to start by saying yes to the person and maybe even to their idea. So validating the person, starting with connection and saying, hey, listen, I see what you're trying to do here. That sounds amazing, just as a for instance. So that might be a phrase I open with. I'm impressed with all you're doing. I can see how that's valuable. So I'm going to say yes to the person. I'm acknowledging their effort and what it is they're doing. Let's say this is a colleague or maybe one of my team members who's coming to me saying, hey, I've got this idea. I want to do this. Can you be a part of it? Or can you do X, Y, or Z? And I'm like, I really can't. Let me start by affirming them and affirming what they're trying to do, assuming it's heading in a good direction. Next, I'm going to add some information to the conversation, which is the clarity part, which is, all right, so I have got these 3 priorities on my plate right now, and there is just no way that I can contribute my time, effort right now to that project. Sounds amazing. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I have to say no. Right? So it's that saying, sometimes people say no as a complete sentence. Well, we can do a little bit better than that with, getting the connection, affirming the person that it's not just no, I'm not doing that. Right? So we're going to maintain the relationship.
We'll be right back. Are you looking for an easy and effective way to boost your nonprofit's donations? Look no further than DonorBox, the online fundraising platform that streamlines your fundraising efforts, maximizes donations, and simplifies giving for your supporters. With DonorBox, you can create beautiful donation forms, accept digital wallet payments, track donations, and send auto receipts. And the best part? There are no setup or monthly fees and no long-term contracts required. So what are you waiting for? Visit donorbox.org today to get started. That is donorbox.org. Are you ready to revolutionize your advocacy efforts and significantly impact policy change? Discover Quorum and level up your advocacy to better educate more lawmakers. Quorum is the only unified public affairs platform that empowers nonprofits to map, track, change, and report on the policy landscape, all in one place. Explore how Quorum Grassroots helps nonprofits create compelling campaigns in minutes. The result? Your nonprofit doesn't just participate in the advocacy, it drives it. Quorum, where influence meets innovation. You can learn more at quorum.us. Hey friends, and thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I want to let you know that I've recently become a professional certified coach. With my nearly 30 years of nonprofit experience, I know firsthand how hard you work as a leader. I also know how important it is to have someone you can call on to get help with the barriers, the leadership challenges that you will face both professionally and personally. And I really want people to thrive, to become all they were meant to become by providing coaching and consulting services. So if coaching is something you've always been interested in, but maybe weren't quite sure what it was all about, I encourage you to reach out. You can go to my website, robharder.com, or just email me at rob@robharder.com. I would happy to provide a free sample coaching session so you can determine if coaching is for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Now back to the show. I like that. So that connection, clarity, and then talk about the consequences. Those are good. And then be curious. After that, you have a conversation, add some curiosity to it. That's a great guidelines to help. Well, another source of stress that happens for employees is feeling invisible or being ignored. So why do you say that people should lean into that feeling? Talk more about that.
With the feeling of it, like when you're feeling something like that, the first thing you got to recognize, you're feeling it. Like you can't just ignore it, right? And I have a podcast as well, Leadership Without Losing Your Soul. And I interviewed a woman, and by the way, in this book, in Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, in addition to our research and our writing and so forth, we also, in most of the chapters, feature an expert insight from leader practitioners, from other thought leaders, experts, and so forth. And one of the people that I had interviewed, her name was Ronnie Puranik, and she is today the CFO, global CFO of a oil petroleum type based company. And her father runs the company. He's the CEO. And she had been doing all this work for all this time. And many of the people around the world treated her as a leader, as a formal leader, but she didn't have the title and she didn't have some of the responsibility that came with it. And so she was feeling invisible. Now multiply that times, and now it's your father who you're feeling invisible that way. And so it's like, wow, you have to lean into that. You can't ignore that. And there's something she wanted. So how do you ask for what you want? And that's really what this is about. Acknowledge your feelings. Then in many cases, there's a conversation you want to have with yourself first. And for instance, you might say, okay, have I really learned everything I could possibly learn to justify what I'm asking for? Do I really know what I need to know? And to be honest with yourself about that. All right, so let me get clear. Ooh, you know what? If I really want to ask this, if I really want to be seen here, maybe I need to learn how to use spreadsheets a little bit better. Okay. Or do development work or, whatever it is. All right. So I'm going to ask that. Then another question to ask myself, do I have an appetite to take on the risk and responsibility that comes with this level of authority or whatever that it is that I'm asking? So you have that. Then you go ask for what you want. And the ask for what you want part is essentially going to the person saying, hey, listen, this is what I'm looking at. I would really like to be considered for this role. Or I would like to, in Ronnie's case, her exact phrasing, she said, I've been being treated this level of responsibility. And I haven't had that title. I would formally like to ask for that title. If you're comfortable with that, let's take your time. I know this is new for you. And then let's work on that together. And so she created space, back to the connection, so forth. But the clarity of, I really want this.
Well, another growing concern is this quiet quitting that we mentioned earlier. It's happening more and more. I've seen it in the organization that I lead. At the bottom of this trend really is burnout most of the time or just feeling overwhelmed. So how can leaders proactively address these root issues before their staff just end up quiet quitting?
Yeah. So, and I think, it's funny. I just last week was doing a program on this topic and used the phrase quiet quitting, and chat just blew up. It was an online program. And just, with everything you imagine. But one person said, I'm not fond of that phrase. And we use it in the book, right? So I'm not critiquing my own phrase, but the person said, I'm not fond of that phrase because it can really mean different things for different people. And for some people, it just means I'm just doing my job. And I'm not where newspaper articles and everything, oh my gosh, it's disengagement. No, I'm doing my job. Like, why is that a problem? And so I think some of this depends on the manager's perspective and getting clear. I'm going to go back to clarity. What does success really look like for the role that you're thinking about here? Because what happens sometimes is a person starts in a role, and this happens in nonprofit work all the time. Person starts in the role and they've got a great personality, or we really like them for whatever assets they were bringing, and the role builds around them because of who they are. Well, then the organization grows. We're getting more role clarity. We need more specialization. And now all of a sudden, this person is in a position that doesn't necessarily fit because the role has changed, but they haven't. Well, what do we do with that? Well, one of the most important things you can do as a leader is to have the conversation, connection. Hey, listen, so you create your meeting time, do this individually, one-on-one, but hey, listen, I really care about you, really value your contribution to the organization. And I want to have a conversation about some changes that have happened. And they're not always easy. But these things are necessary if we are going to grow and serve our clients, provide the level of service our donors or funders expect, and so forth. And so here's the situation. The role was this. This role is now this. And I want to make sure that we're both on the same page about what success looks like in this role today, because it has changed. And that's not fair to you to not call that out and to really have that conversation. And I also want to give you a chance to respond to that. You may go, yeah, totally has. And yeah, I'm going to have to learn some things to get better in this ABC area. Or I don't want to do that. That is not of interest to me. In which case, totally fair. Let's have a different conversation. Is there a place for that person's skills? Or has the organization outgrown them and we wish them well and help them transition as compassionately and humanely as we can?
Okay, well, one last question. Let's talk about conflicts that no matter how hard you've tried to address it or solve it, it doesn't go away. Do you ever think there are conflicts that just simply can't be resolved? And if so, how will someone know when it's time to walk away from that particular workplace?
Yeah, chapter 7 of the book, the chapter title is "Say Goodbye," and the subtitle is "How to Know When It's Time to Quit a Conflict." Because the shortest answer to your question is yes, of course, there are some conflicts that we're not going to resolve, or we will resolve, but not by both of us getting on the same page and creating a mutually satisfying answer. We're going to resolve it by choosing to do something else in a different way. And so, as my co-author and partner in life and work and everything says, Karin Hurt, there's a difference between being courageous and being stupid, right? And so if you're in a values clash where, I'm just going to take a real practical example here. So early in my career, we're working for a CEO. This is in the nonprofit world, doing a marketing event to attract funding and dollars and some strategic relationships. And I really disagreed. I was like a year in, and I super disagreed with how he was going about it. I thought it lacked integrity. I didn't think it was on the up and up with the people who were coming and what we were going to put on the ground and what they were going to see. And I felt it was disingenuous. Well, I didn't say anything because CEO, right? So sat there and stewed for 3 days, 3 nights. I wasn't sleeping. I was frustrated, getting ulcers, everything else. Too young for this, and I didn't use any powerful phrases or anything else. But after 3 days of stewing, I just popped my cork. And I said, listen, I don't like this. I don't think it has integrity. I can't be a part of this. So I didn't tell him to change, but I said, I can't be a part of this. Well, what do you think he said next? One possibility, he could have said, there's the door. You don't like it, get out. He could have said any number of things. And in my head, the worst story and we do this all the time, is we tell ourselves the worst story. Well, I can't say anything or I'm going to get fired. Well, not necessarily. And what he actually said was, David, I don't see it the way you see it. I don't think it lacks integrity at all. And I don't want you violating your conscience. Right? He was a values-based leader and he didn't want me violating my conscience. And then he asked me a very important question, a curiosity question I had not considered. David, how do you think we could do this in a way that would work for you? Oh, brilliant question, right? What would a successful outcome do for you is what he was asking me, right? Like, oh, well, that's actually easy. What if we just tell the people who are coming that this is what we're doing? And he went, yeah, we can do that. No problem. Boom, problem solved, right? Now, that one worked out. I got credit as somebody who is thinking with integrity and so forth. I maybe didn't say it the best way at all, but he taught me that if I stayed silent, my silence was selfish because I was depriving him of a chance to make a different choice. I was also depriving myself of a chance to make an informed choice. And this is when we get to, when do you quit a conflict? So let's say I had that conversation and I say, hey, listen, I'm not feeling comfortable about this. And we have a chapter, and how to say no around ethics as well. So I'm not feeling comfortable about this ethically for the following reasons. And I can bring a solution. I'm wondering, curiosity, what if we were to do this? Because I know we need to raise the money. I know these relationships are important. And I know this is the only window we can use. What if we did it this way? That'd be a much more productive way to go about it. Now, at that point, he might say, nope, I disagree. This is the way I see it. This is the way I want to do it. And, appreciate you speaking up, but no, that's not what we're doing. All right. Well, now I know. Instead of guessing, instead of telling myself all these stories, now I know where he really stands. And now I can make an informed choice.
Okay. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation, David. And for my listeners who want to maybe connect with you personally and or find this book, which is the best place you would send them to do that?
Absolutely. So the name of the book, again, is Powerful Phrases for Dealing with Workplace Conflict, What to Say Next to De-Stress the Workday, Build Collaboration, and Calm Difficult Customers. You can find the book anywhere books are sold, just about. It's available in all the ways, paperback, ebook, audiobook with Karin and I narrating. And then as well, I have to throw that audiobook in there for the podcast listeners, right? But in terms of where to find us, you can go to our website is letsgrowleaders.com. And we have got a wealth of resources there, including if you go to books and click on this one, there is a 30-some page free available PDF that you can download that is a conversation collaborative guide so that you can walk your team through these tools and equip your team, no extra cost, just the investment of a little bit of time, which I know nonprofit leaders so often, where do we get the resources to help develop our folks? Also, if it's worthwhile for them, we've got some other ways that they can invest in really, really affordable, low-cost development. But that's free and available for everybody at letsgrowleaders.com.
Excellent. Okay, good. Well, again, David, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for bringing all these insights to my listeners. And it's so practical. Again, it's so good. I encourage you to check out the book and find out a little bit more about David. Thanks again for being on the show.
Rob, been my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, friends. Well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep making your world better. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Go to YouTube and look up Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. We'll see you there. This podcast is sponsored by DonorBox. DonorBox, helping you help others with the best donation forms in the business.